Let's face it, we've all got a bit of a sweet tooth. But Brazil could well have the rest of the world beat when it comes to sugary foods. Of all the most traditional desserts in Brazil, such as brigadeiro, beijinho, or pudim de leite, almost all of them are loaded with sugar, to the point that they are almost diabetes-inducing. Order a simple black coffee at a Brazilian bakery, and it could come sweetened with up to 4 or 5 spoons of sugar. And sure, sometimes it can be nice to indulge your sweet side, but all this comes at a price. At the end of November, Brazil's Ministry of Health signed an agreement with leaders of the food and drink industry to reduce the amount of sugar in their products by 144,000 tonnes by 2022. Will it work? And why do Brazilians eat so much sugar in the first place? My name is Ewan Marshall, standing in for Editor-in-Chief Gustavo Ribeiro, and this is Explaining Brazil. To discuss Brazil's love-hate relationship with sugar, we're joined today by Sophie Derum, registered nutritionist with a PhD from the Faculty of Medicine of the University of São Paulo and author of the best-selling book O Peso das Dietas. Hi Sophie, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for the invitation.
So, excellent. To kick off, where do you think Brazil's obsession with sugar comes from? Because the country is still the world's largest producer of sugar cane. Do you think that might have something to do with it? Why Brazil consumes so much sugar?
Well, actually, yes, that might be some clue. It's actually, well, I'm French. I've been 19 years in Brazil, living in Brazil. And I am actually currently Brazilian too. And I was shocked when I arrived in Brazil with this sweet tooth that you can see everywhere, and even the sweets are sweeter.
Yeah, definitely.
It's strange, and so I was a little bit shocked with that. I had to get used to this, and for sure, Brazil has been for a long time very big on sugar, because it was one of the biggest crops that actually started as an industrial size in Brazil a long time ago. So I'm sure that it's part of the culture. But also, I guess that something that's very surprising here is that not only, the sweets, the homemade sweets are sweeter. I don't know if you realize that, but also all the highly processed food like yogurt and even the cakes, everything is sweeter. So I actually myself, I am a food engineer, and I talked to some executive from a big food company, a French food company, very big here in Brazil, and I said, "What are you doing here?" Because the yogurt is much sweeter than in France. And also in France we have more fruits, and here it's like a preparado de fruta. It's like a syrup, a fruit syrup. So and in some yogurts you compare the same yogurt in France or in Portugal and here in Brazil, and you can have 15 to 20% more sugar.
Wow.
Yeah, they are actually working on that. It's lowering here, but. Yeah, it's very surprising. Everything is very sweet. And I remember the response that this executive told me at that time. He said, "Sophie, the French yogurt, nobody would buy it here." And it's true. They are very eager on sweet. So I agree that it's another taste that they have. I remember bringing some sweets from France and giving to all the people at the hospital where I was working, all the nutritionists, for them to try, and they didn't like it at all because it was very tart,
Wow. The exact opposite thing happened to me the first time I came back from Brazil, when I brought sweets for my family. Like, they could barely eat them. They were just far too sweet. Yeah, so it is a real kind of drastic difference in tastes.
Yes, it's a difference, but we can see that also the sweet tooth is like kind of maintained with all those sugars. So it's kind of a vicious circle. And it's very interesting that I do have a practice. I have some patients, and when we work on lowering our sweet tooth, they actually do very well, and they do as well as French. So it's not something genetic, it's more like a habit. And since the industry is putting a lot of sugar, the people are used to this. So it's kind of making it, a kind of a dependence.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, because I remember having seen many times before young Brazilian children who would drink these fizzy soft drinks from a really young age, or they would go to school with a massive packet of biscuits and eat the whole thing at lunchtime. So why are these children developing this habit so early? Why are they having all this access to all of this really sugary food?
Yeah, for sure, it's not them buying at the supermarket. It's more the parents. We see a lot of very strong advertisement on TV too, and this is quite a problem because it's also pretty recent. We see a lot of accessibility to the highly processed food, even in very remote places, and it's kind of also a status to be able to buy those products. So I worked for a long time at the Children Obesity Ambulatory at the Hospital das Clínicas, and our main public were people from very poor communities, and it was actually making us very sad to see that the parents were working hard in order to buy those products. And so when we were training them to go back to arroz feijão, which is a rice and bean and home cooked meal, they were actually relieved, because they were actually not spending so much on these products. So it's kind of enhanced by the advertisement, unfortunately. And if you see, it's all highly processed food that they are having, those kids. And there is a very, very good film about that. I don't know if you heard of it. It's called Muito Além do Peso. It's beyond the weight.
Yeah, and like kind of very overweight, something like.
Actually, it's a documentary that went on the air like a few years ago about how the children environment, the food environment for children in Brazil is very high on sugar. It's very, very sad. You see very remote places like on the Amazon River where they don't have any access. But then you have a boat with a very highly processed food from a big international brand that has been criticized on the New York Times. So, being like the only source of pleasure that the whole village is waiting for. So, unfortunately, we see that those products have been very easy to get, easy access. They are all over Brazil right now.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure we will add a link to that documentary in the notes of this particular episode. I highly encourage you to check that out. We could just move on quickly to... Sure. There was recently a resolution from the Ministry of Health, the Brazilian Ministry of Health, which have signed an agreement with some industry leaders of the food and drink sector, and they have pledged to reduce by 144,000 tonnes the level of sugar in their products. So now, what do you, as a nutritionist, as someone who's a specialist in this area, what do you make of this resolution, and do you think it has a chance of maybe being successful?
The industry is saying that they are going to slow down on the sugar, which is good. But when you read in details, you see that it's not going to change many things, because basically the big companies already have this kind of quantities that they are actually supposed to reach. And it's also an agreement. So it's nothing like they have to do. It's something they can do if they want to. So it's kind of, for me, it's a big show, and maybe to redeem the industry, because they are actually seeing that there is going to be a big backlash about sugar, like we saw with cigarettes. Now we see that the food industry is quite worried about this quantity of free sugars that you have. As a food engineer and also nutritionist, I can tell you it's not going to make a big difference, and I could explain why. The law is quite permissive. You can say without any sugar added, and you actually don't add any sugar, the white powder. But you can add syrup, you can add fruit concentrate, and you can add whatever. And it's very interesting because in the States or in Europe, when you say no sugar added, you actually cannot put that any syrup or any fruit concentrate.
Have a flight to catch, or maybe you missed your flight because of traffic? Experience the best way to get to and from the airport with Voom. Voom is an on-demand helicopter booking platform that allows its passengers to rise above it all. It is possible to fly between 9 different helipads in the city from Monday to Saturday for less than 500 reais. Uplift your commute, uplift your life. Download the Voom app free on the App Store. VOOM. Voom is an Airbus company.
Okay, so we're back with Sophie Derham, the registered nutritionist and author of the best-selling book O Peso das Dietas, and we're continuing our discussion about Brazil's crackdown on sugar. Now, Sophie, we've talked about the industry's agreement with the Ministry of Health, and maybe that it's not all that it appears to be, but let's talk about society as a whole. Let's talk about these Brazilian people who are consuming too much sugar and too much free sugar. What can they do to try to reduce their consumption and maybe try to live healthier lives?
It's not that difficult, and actually the Ministry of Health guide, the food guide, has been called the best food guide in the world. Do you know that?
Wow.
Yeah.
I should read it then.
Yeah, the Brazilian, they actually made a very bold food guide in 2014. It actually, the book was launched exactly the same day than my book. So, and I'm in touch with Professor Carlos Monteiro and all his team that actually coordinated this guide. Because they were very bold into saying, well, the best thing to do for your health is not counting calories, it's not, demonize any food, but go back to eat real food. Go back to cook, go back to eat like your culture taught you to cook. And so the best thing to do to lower your sugar intake is first lower on the highly processed, as we said, because there is a lot of free sugars hidden, but also cook and do your meals, or try to find some meals that are like freshly cooked. It's very interesting that the science, and there is a very big Harvard study that showed that the best protection against obesity and diabetes is actually home-cooked meals. And it's very interesting because not only when you cook at home, or when you eat fresh food from real food, you actually eat better, but you also, when you go outside to eat, you don't go to junk food. You go to a better restaurant because it's already good at home. Very interesting. So it's not something you really have to force yourself. It's just a very interesting way of life. So we are actually the whole new trend in nutrition is actually enhancing this home cooking and trying to make it easier because we don't have time. So we need the industry because the industry is there to bring us the good quality, very practical and hygienized food. but try to look for the less processed. So when you, for example, you make a pasta, you can use a processed sauce, but look at the ingredients, because unfortunately some tomato sauce will start with sugar in this country. In Brazil, we have some tomato sauce that starts with sugar, and so the first ingredient is sugar, which is the most ingredient, and then you have the tomato. So it's like a little bit scary. And for example, all those sauces are not into the agreement. So the agreement is about the sodas, the biscuits, the yogurts, and some chocolates, but they are not about cereals. They are not about gelatinas, all those sauces that are highly in sugar. So basically, try to make it simple.
Okay, yeah, I mean that's really good advice, because as you're saying, these really processed foods are found in places where you wouldn't expect them to be. You wouldn't expect this food to be full of free sugars, as you were saying, the example of the tomato sauce. And just quickly, just for our listeners, as you're a specialist in this, when we talk about these free sugars and these processed foods, why exactly are these so bad for us?
Oh, okay. Actually, they are not bad. Like, you should not go against them as poison. As I said, that there is an exaggeration against sugar. There is also There are some people getting on war against highly processed food. They can be part of your intake, but make it occasional. When you take all the homes in Brazil and you separate them in 5 groups, and you compare the homes that have less highly processed food and the home that are the most highly processed food, so even at equal calories, you see that the family with highly processed food is much more at risk of obesity and diabetes. So why we don't actually understand 100%, and it's not only the sugar, the culprit, the free sugars, but for sure now we have a lot of science coming, and there is a very famous study that's this year in 2018. About a French study that was actually published in a British journal that showed that the more you use highly processed food, the more you are at your risk of cancer high, and it's like 10% more presence of highly processed food and 10% more risk of cancer. So it's not a very it's quite a big information. So right now there is a very big movement to see that the more we outsource our food from the industry, the more we are at risk of diseases. When you eat sugar in excess and drink a lot of sugary drinks and eat a lot of sugar, you are more at risk of diabetes and also excess weight. But it's not like eating sugar that makes you diabetic. So we should take a little bit of reflection and remember that the generations before us, they were eating some sugar. But we have been going a little bit overboard. So for sure, it's very interesting to slow down. So let's try to do it together and make it a better world.
Excellent. Now, just before we let you go, Sophie, I know that in this podcast we have been bad-mouthing a lot of Brazilian sweets, but come on, you must have a favourite Brazilian sweet. You must have one that you're desperate to go home and have right now.
Desperate? No, I'm sorry.
Oh.
No, but I do appreciate mousse de maracujá. I do appreciate some, like a small slice of pudding or even goiabada. But most of the time I go for the fruit here because it's like amazing. It's a country that has that is so rich in tropical fruits that for me it's still a big feast when I can have a very ripe and tasty mango or pineapple.
So we'll leave it there for today. I highly encourage our listeners to go and check out Sophie's website, which is www.sophiederam.com, and Derham is spelled D-E-R-A-M. And also make sure to follow her on Instagram at Sophie Derham, and on Facebook at Os Segredos da Sophie, which is her page there. Thanks very much for joining us today, Sophie. I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you for the invitation. I loved it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a look at our website. It's Brazilian.report. Every day we have new content about Brazilian politics, finance and society, and we also have exclusive newsletter services if you want to be briefed about what's going on in Brazil before starting your day. Subscribe to our free trial and enjoy all of our content for 14 days. And it's totally free. You don't have to submit any credit card information whatsoever. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Our handle is @BrazilianReport. And that's all for now. And we won't see you next week, as Explaining Brazil is going to take a little rest for the holiday season. But don't worry, we'll be back in January with lots more interviews helping you get to the bottom of all the big issues in Brazil. So it's goodbye for now, and see you in the new year.
Honey, oh, sugar, sugar.